After fire and the wheel, the next big catalyst of human progress is the internet. It gave us the opportunity to freely exchange information and be connected with each other. The next frontier for us is to connect ourselves and the devices we control with each other to our physical world. Today, an estimated 50 billion devices are connected globally, but there has been a technical limitation with connecting them.
5G stands to break this barrier and has the potential to massively accelerate the adoption of the so-called Internet of Things. But with increased power comes increased responsibility and increased vulnerability. The global IoT market is expected to grow sevenfold in the next 5 years. Let's explore.
Welcome to the UTX podcast, your source of technology and tomorrow's utopia, presented by two Techniax. I'm Valentin.
And I'm Mani. And today we're going to talk about what 5G and IoT are and how they work. Then we will take a look at the industry, the big players, its applications, and its challenges. And we will top it off with our signature Utopian Day in the Life.
We would also like to mention that you can now find a blog article about our episodes on Medium. You currently find there our last episode on COVID vaccination technologies, as well as soon also on this episode. Let's dive into it. So what is 5G and the Internet of Things? 5G is the fifth generation technology standard for so-called broadband cellular networks. Cellular phone companies began deploying it worldwide in 2019. It's the planned successor for the 4G networks, which provide connectivity to most current cell phones. Some of the benefits of 5G were already present in 4G. This includes the increased number of MIMO or multiple in, multiple out antennas for increased signal capacity and the ability to steer radio waves in computer-controlled directions using wave phase shifting, also called beamforming, which also increases signal quality.
But the main advantage of 5G is that it will have greater bandwidth and thus offer higher download speeds, eventually up to 10 gigabits per second. This is 100 times faster than 4G. Now, due to the increased bandwidth, it is expected that networks will not exclusively serve cell phones alone, like existing cellular networks, but they will also be used as general internet service providers for laptops, desktop computers, and more. Thus, they will be able to compete with existing ISPs, such as cable internet, and they will also enable new applications in Internet of Things and machine-to-machine areas.
The Internet of Things, or IoT, to present some sort of taxonomy, is a network of physical objects exchanging data using sensors, software, and network connections. The network infrastructure is established using connectivity networks like Wi-Fi, which stands for wireless fidelity, which I almost never use or haven't heard of, but it's actually that. LoRaWAN, which means long-range wide area network, or 5G. And it uses a gateway protocol to connect sensor data, usually to cloud databases, which in turn allow software applications to access the data using APIs. Data is then used for analytics and prediction using algorithms to output visualizations and notifications to the end user, as well as controlling so-called actuators, which perform a task or regulate a parameter, for instance, to regulate the heat inside a building.
In the last few years or decades, the cost of production for these sensors has dramatically decreased. This allows us to industrialize the production of low-cost sensor for many sensor types, and thus it allows us to use these sensors on all kinds of objects and materials.
Next to sensors, we also talk a lot about the connectivity innovations that happened. There are a couple of main technology streams to provide the connectivity for IoT systems, with cellular networks, and 5G is what we are focusing on today based on its capacity and signal quality. So LPWANs are quite energy efficient, and they resemble private or unlicensed networks for large area sites. On the other hand, mesh protocols are for short-range wireless connectivity. They are low-power networks with higher data rates, but less power efficiency than LPWANs.
We also have Bluetooth and its short-range IoT version known as Bluetooth Low Energy or BLE. Another one is Wi-Fi, which we use in our day-to-day lives, but this is not as common for IoT systems because it is very weak in scalability, coverage, and power use. Next, we have RFID, radio frequency identification. This uses radio waves just like cellular networks, but it transmits data from RFID tags to readers at a short distance. And this is used in logistics, in retail, in some places to identify cars, in car parking, or even in payment methods. Finally, we have Ethernet, which uses a cable and fiber optic links in conjunction with hubs and switches. It has a very high performance in terms of latency, but obviously it is very limited in range.
IoT is experiencing a boost due to the increased availability of 5G networks around the world. Previously unlicensed LoRaWAN networks or long-range wide area network have been used to provide IoT connectivity. What 5G offers in comparison to 4G is comprehensive availability, increased range, increased capacity, as well as bandwidth, and reduced latency. All of these are crucial for IoT systems to work, considering the increasing number of devices connected and the requirements that critical systems pose towards connectivity performance.
Now that we've covered what 5G and IoT are, let's take a look into how they work. To understand this, let's first start with how cellular telecommunications networks work in general. Now, an area in general, a country, is divided geographically into cells, each of which contain cell towers. Now, if your friend calls you and you pick up your phone, your voice signal is transported as electromagnetic waves, usually radio waves, to a nearby cell tower's antenna. The cell tower converts the signal into light pulses, which the tower's base transceiver, receiver, and transmitter then route towards the destination tower via optical fiber cables.
So 5G is very good, and it's in fact that good that we also can consider it as an alternative to Wi-Fi and cable internet for laptops and desktop computers. So we can not just apply it to mobile phones, but also stationary computers. The increased speed by 5G is achieved by using higher frequency radio waves than before, which however have a shorter range. This increases the demand to have more cells, the cell towers, because we need to establish them at a closer range to each other.
Another benefit is that 5G also experiences reduced latency when confronted with many devices. While 4G's traffic rates were 200 milliseconds, 5G's latency is estimated to be 1 millisecond. It is estimated that there will be up to 438 million objects connected to 5G networks by the end of 2021. And by 2025, we're expecting 1.7 billion subscribers. Ericsson even says that 5G will have covered 65% of the world's population by 2025. Now, these devices are not just human controlled, but they also include objects. So if you compare it with 4G, 4G can communicate with 4,000 devices per square kilometer, and 5G can do so with 1 million devices. This is very relevant if you consider that that in 2020, we had an estimate of 50 billion devices connected already.
What 5G also does is it simplifies both software-defined networking, or SDN, and also network function virtualization. What it means is that we can split up networking resources into several slices by using software. Those slices might reflect different MVNOs, mobile virtual network operators, or also might represent different functions. So mobile virtual network operators, pretty surely you have some in your country, are those that do not run their own network infrastructure, but instead they lease it from an infrastructure provider which in many cases is the state-owned telecom company providing it to those MVNOs. And actually they have to usually because of the cartel laws. Those slices, as mentioned, might also reflect different functions or application use cases for the networking resources, posing different requirements, such as you could have one slice for mobile telephony and one for connected cars. The requirements here differ significantly by such factors as speed, capacity, coverage, encryption, or security in general.
One of the backbones for IoT devices to make and execute such intelligent decisions is edge or fog computing and deep reinforcement learning. Now, fog computing means you reallocate data processing tasks back from the cloud to so-called edge devices, which are located physically close to the IoT device. IoT devices themselves should be designed to be lightweight and have a long battery life. Thus, they should not execute processing tasks themselves, but merely provide the data. As the devices generate a lot of sensor data, it is very beneficial to perform these computing tasks on edge devices instead of offloading them to the cloud, which would reduce bandwidth requirements. And this would also allow the cloud to directly work with processed data rather than raw data. 5G also enables edge computing. Now, the idea of edge computing is to run cloud-based environments, but to run them physically close to the respective customer to reduce latency and data traffic congestion. And 5G is designed to host mobile edge technology at edge nodes, such as cell towers.
We will also have a separate episode on several concepts, including edge computing, because it's really exciting. Another exciting concept is the intelligence behind IoT decision-making and the technologies that enable that. Because IoT devices or whatever works with the data from IoT devices needs to work with vast amounts of high-dimensional real-time sensor data, such as images or noises, which makes it infeasible to perform data labeling or feature engineering on the device in many cases. Deep learning methods utilizing artificial neural networks with several hidden layers are shown to perform much better with such data than classical machine learning algorithms do, especially in computer vision and natural language processing, which we so often use in IoT use cases. Reinforcement learning, on the other side, models the decision-making process of a computational agent in a game, aiming to optimize the game's outcome as a reward that the agent or several agents share by exploring different actions in a given action state space. The deep part of RL, or reinforcement learning, usually refers to utilizing deep learning to estimate optimal action policies in high-dimensional state spaces. And once again, also on reinforcement learning and other concepts of machine learning, we will have a separate episode.
Now, finally, one of the last demands for IoT is software-defined networking that we saw before. This is needed to dynamically control, split, and provide networking resources and access to them. Now, increasing complexity and customization of IoT systems means that software-defined networking will come into play and will play a big role. Think, for instance, about a smart home system where you would ideally only want to share your data within the home network. So this is where SDN will be very relevant.
As always, a lot of tech, and this was sort of meant to be the complex part. You bring you over the most important inner workings of IoT technology. Let's look at the current state of the industry. Currently, there are around 50 billion connected devices in the world. And not all of those are IoT devices, but more than 30 billion of those are estimated to be IoT devices. By 2030, this figure is expected to jump to 125 billion devices. So quite a significant jump, 3 to 4x. By the end of 2020, the IoT devices market has been estimated to be at 248 billion US dollars. In 2025, this is expected to jump to 1.6 trillion US dollars. So once again, that's a 6 to 7x increase.
Interestingly, over 40% of IoT devices are not expected to be for consumers, but instead to be used in factories, manufacturing sites, and industrial applications. Some of these 50 billion IoT devices, not all of them, will be expected to connect to 5G MMTC, such as connected cars or drones. However, some devices will still benefit from high-speed fiber connections, like in remote surgery, as they're still more reliable and faster than any wireless connection on Earth.
As always, we look at the big players, especially for this technology, it's very multi-industrial. So we look at those that provide the standards and those that provide the infrastructure for all of this to work. And when we talk about standards in 5G, what we need to talk about is the International Telecommunication Union, which has also administered previous mobile cellular standards. It's a United Nations agency responsible for telecommunications and the industry consortium, which is called Third Generation Partnership Project, 3GPP. The ITU has published 3 goals for 5G. First of all, they want to have the enhanced mobile broadband, or eMBB, which concerns mobile telephony and phone traffic as a progression from 4G LTE. And then they also want to have ultra-reliable low-latency communications, or URLLC, for critical systems and massive machine-type communications, or MMTC, for IoT applications. As you can imagine, those are different requirements towards connectivity. As of now, only eMBB is implemented in most locations, and in many locations, 5G is not to be implemented within the next couple of years, so still a long leeway to go.
Currently, 9 telecom firms provide other carriers with 5G hardware and systems. These are Altiostar, Cisco, Datang, Ericsson, Huawei, Nokia, Qualcomm, Samsung, and ZTE. In the smart home industry, which is another big area, the major players and their products are Google Home and Nest by Google, Amazon Alexa with Echo and their Ring doorbells, the Apple HomeKit, Samsung SmartThings, as well as other non-proprietary solutions such as Home Assistant, OpenHab, or Domotics.
So smart homes is one of the more famous examples, also one of the more controversial ones. But perhaps the most exciting IoT application discussed is smart cities. In a smart city, connected devices communicate with each other to self-organize, share resources, and automate daily tasks, such as powering homes with energy, organizing the traffic, or performing garbage collection. This also bears great potential to making cities more efficient and more sustainable. Infrastructure such as bridges or railway tracks can be monitored and maintenance of such automatically be coordinated, which we'll also see there. We have some examples for that.
So one of the big examples is the Pioneer, the business district of the city Songdo in South Korea. They have a population of 50,000 people, which is an ubiquitous area built from scratch of around 600 hectares in size. Now, this city has connected traffic sensors, smart energy use, connected water pipes that are designed to prevent drinkable water being wasted for showering or toilets. Citizens are automatically notified when their buses arrive. Authorities are automatically notified when a crime happens. Garbage is disposed directly into underground recycling pipes. And there is also a 25-kilometer biking path and several charging stations for electric vehicles around the city. So this is a small teaser test run of what a smart city could look like in the future.
This almost sounds like our utopian day already. Another city example is Santander in Spain. It's a city of 180,000 inhabitants. Authorities there have equipped the city with more than 10,000 sensors, so that's also a significant investment, as you can imagine, as well as they've developed a smartphone app that enables services like finding a parking spot and also environmental monitoring.
We've seen cities now. We've even found examples for smart infrastructure. One of these is the St. Anthony Falls Bridge in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the US. A sensing system measures structural behavior, corrosion, defections, structural vibrations, temperature, and even fluoride levels based on optic sensors and accelerometers. This data is monitored by the University of Minnesota, which will then develop a long-term monitoring system for this bridge. Of the 234 million US dollars capex for the bridge, only a small fraction that is $1 million, was spent for the sensing systems. So that's pretty efficient given how much data, how much understanding of the bridge you can pull ahead to avoid any disaster or catastrophe.
Pretty impactful, and we've deliberately chosen examples that are quite advanced and have a big impact. But further examples and bigger ones that will also make the headlines are in the making, such as deployments of a whole smart city in San Jose, California, in Guangzhou in China, or in the Singapore area. Also, smart infrastructure like tracking the water vessels is being conducted in New York, and we will probably see those making headlines in the upcoming months and years.
IoT and machine-to-machine communication has been considered to be nothing less than the fourth industrial revolution. And it has been mentioned in a row with the other three revolutions, the advent of steam engines, electricity, computers, and now IoT. And this fourth revolution provides us with increased automation capabilities in manufacturing, industrial applications, by communication and self-monitoring between machines and computer systems so that we can run these production processes and solve problems in so-called cyber-physical systems without the need for any human intervention. This frees up a lot of human labor while also making it more safe, because humans no longer have to work in potentially dangerous areas. Now, these include smart factories and the predictive maintenance of factory equipment. The term itself, Industry 4.0, was coined by the German government in 2011, so it's been 10 years, but it has risen to prominence ever since.
Further use cases of IoT and sensor technology we can find in virtual reality and in connected cars. As we've already discussed in our autonomous vehicle episode, go check that out if you haven't yet, sensor-based IoT systems with communication between traffic systems and vehicles help to automate the regulation of traffic as well as road safety, but also things such as toll collection and smart parking. So a lot of application areas of IoT technology to make our roads safer and more efficient. Connected cars themselves also rely on lots of sensor input and then fuse them together. They also need data processing and connectivity capabilities in order to make decisions on the road and optimize their behavior in contrast to what they would do if they couldn't, and then we would have huge damage. In the future, the emergence of so-called micro-electromechanical systems, also known as MEMS or smart dust, further enhances IoT capabilities. What is meant is microscopically small sensors and even robots that communicate to a computer network and are able to detect radio frequencies, similar to if you think about RFID, which is radio frequency identification, where you also have these tags that connect to each other and can essentially do authentication and other stuff. This allows smart dust to detect light, temperature, vibration, magnetism, chemicals, and more. The application areas for this is also quite vast, but it's still quite an emergent technology, and it's being explored and researched on.
Now, another area is probably a bit more futurist, but we are, after all, Utopian Techniax, not just normal Techniax. So one of these is GeoWeb, or Digital Earth. And it's basically the idea of having a real-life Google Earth, be it with brain-computer interfaces or VR, that you can essentially visit a place or object or see a visual representation of knowledge about it. And IoT technology is a major enabler for this idea. Now, the Digital Earth can, of course, be expanded, where you can have a visual representation of knowledge, not just about the Earth, but about all sorts of things that you learn about.
Within IoT, one of the more mature markets is smart home, and it's also being heavily worked upon by the big consumer companies, as we've seen. And it might also allow them to learn more about IoT systems and hopefully making them more secure and safer as they currently are, and also private. What smart home means technically is we equip home appliances and functions such as lighting, electricity, blinds, air conditioning, and media systems we equip them with sensors and the so-called actuators, which allow us to control them with our voice or in general via software. And for the voice connection to the software, we use NLP and voice recognition as well as a mobile app. The benefit for this is, depending on the implementation, increased security to physical outside threats, because it can also be used for security purposes, increased convenience, as most of us know, but it can also significantly support the disabled by allowing them to control their home without relying on motoric capabilities, without having to stand up, walk around, and use their hands, but instead use their voice. And for instance, alerting them through direct connection to cochlear implants, if needed by a doctor or a medical professional.
Now, we can even extend this to beyond the home, thinking out of the box, out of the home, literally to smart buildings. IoT systems would allow buildings to measure outside conditions and increase energy efficiency by adapting to light and energy, adapting energy consumption accordingly. So if people are not around in their home, maybe the computer learns that this person is out of town for a month, going on vacation, so they can see to reduce energy consumption during the month and then prepare things once they are back. So this allows for a lot of energy to be saved because it can be used in the most optimal way.
Another IoT use case, or in the area of IoT, is wearables and smart healthcare, which we also call the Internet of Medical Things. And this concerns IoT applications for research and monitoring of health-related data. Just as ourselves, we can nowadays monitor our health data like pulse, heart rate, or blood pressure through armbands and other wearables. The technology allows healthcare professionals to perform telemedicine and remote patient monitoring, including aiding devices such as implants or pacemakers, administrating treatments and proper treatment execution, for instance, by measuring medication intake and pushing notifications in case of issues, or implementing emergency notification systems. Goldman Sachs reported in 2015 already that the application of smart healthcare can yearly save up to $300 billion in healthcare costs in the US alone. Upgrading disease prevention and control and patient monitoring by storing patient records in databases and making them accessible to patients, but also across nurses and practitioners, has been a longer-term project already in many healthcare jurisdictions. And it creates massive opportunity for increasing the quality and personalization of healthcare, and also massively saving costs, as well as enabling more economically useful pricing of treatments.
In manufacturing, connected manufacturing devices in collaboration with digital control systems would allow for smart management of manufacturing equipment, and this would even include predictive maintenance and optimization for output and reliability.
In the smart city of tomorrow, next to smart factories, you will also expect to have smart grids. And in the energy space, these are electrical power grids equipped with smart meters that measure power consumption and allow for efficient control of the production and distribution of electricity. In combination with connected motors, pumps, and household appliances, they help to optimize energy management and consumption big time.
Now, in smart cities, you not only need smart grids and smart buildings, but also smart diets. So if we're looking at food and agriculture, useful sensor data includes temperature, humidity, soil content, pest infestation, rainfall, and these are just to name the main ones. Now, this can be used along the entire supply chain, from optimization farming techniques to food processing and fabrication, such as measuring production conditions, even to transportation, that is measuring whether transportation requirements such as temperature and humidity are met. It can also be used in storage and inventory, such as counting products on conveyor belts, counting fish in a fish farm, etc. The list goes on and on. Now, beyond just food and agriculture, you can also have environmental monitoring, and this is very useful for natural habitats, such as track water conditions or wildlife populations. You could even use it to predict and prevent catastrophes such as an earthquake or a tsunami early warning systems. One example is, of course, the DARPA's initiative with tens of thousands of sensors measuring environmental data and vessel activity in the ocean. And this is currently being tested off the coast of South California and in the Gulf of Mexico. Now we've covered all of the applications. Like any other technology, 5G isn't without challenges. And one of the main or bigger challenges is privacy. Now, challenges in 5G privacy and security demand new regulations. An increasing amount of vendors and third-party suppliers interacting with network infrastructure increases exposure to hackers and other risks. Now, the EU recommends national regulators to implement rules to regulate the privacy of the individual's electric communication. This would include pseudonymization and encryption of personal data and data traffic. In the EU, the European Telecommunication Standards Institute, or ETSI, works on such standards. One startup that we found that was very interesting is the Israeli startup Vidu, and they're concerned with protecting IoT devices by detecting and fixing security vulnerabilities in them. And they just raised $25 million in a Series B extension that was backed by, including by Verizon, being one of the many, at the beginning of the year. Now, it's very interesting to look at which industries their focus is, because it says something about the main IoT applications so far. Vidu focuses on industrial deployments, medical systems, communications infrastructure, and automotive, but they're hoping to widen their scope very soon. What's new about Vidu is their approach, in the sense that instead of just looking at the data flow of devices in order to determine a potential security threat or breach even, they look at the behavior of the device itself. So this approach is very unique.
Two more threats that might come up with 5G, given especially the high bandwidth and the vast amounts of data in circulation, is, for instance, the DDoS or distributed denial of services attacks. What happens there is that an attacker purposefully floods the network resources or the network sources with a large amount of requests from different sources at the same time, causing them to be disrupted. Also, on a political level, Western countries are scared of espionage by Chinese equipment manufacturers, Huawei and CTE, which would occur when using their equipment, for instance, if they could monitor electronic communication. That's why some jurisdictions have restricted or even banned the use of equipment from Chinese companies. There are also massive concerns regarding the health impact of 5G caused by the use of radio waves. And this has been shared by the public and also taken up by regulatory bodies and even scientists, which has caused local jurisdictions to delay, restructure, or block their 5G infrastructure implementations. However, as so often, the scientific consensus is that 5G has no major health impact, and no scientific studies were able to prove otherwise so far. However, informing the public remains an important concern. In the UK alone, more than 60 telephone masts have been attacked due to theories circulating online that 5G antennas would spread the coronavirus, which is impossible if you believe the law of physics and also if you have watched our previous episodes on COVID science.
Another challenge regarding 5G concerns is the interference of the electromagnetic wave spectrum. And this could be caused by devices that share a similar spectrum, such as weather sensing instruments or Earth observation satellites. At the current spectrum standards, the World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, which is another UN body, has warned the ITU of potential consequences. This could pose a significant threat to the robustness of 5G systems and also weather forecasts. IoT also shares some major concerns with 5G, especially regarding privacy, security, and ownership of private data. The magnitude and type of data collection enabled by connected devices in one's home is unprecedented, and thus smart home companies possess the abilities to listen to consumers 24/7, potentially at the sacrifice of privacy. As data regulations and directives remain in their infancy stage, development of regulations and regulators have been trying to domesticate big companies like Facebook and Google, with the first success by the GDPR and court rulings. However, the increased threat of mass surveillance enabled by IoT technology prevails, and this is a common theme of many of our episodes, as these technologies are developed by big corporations that are controlling a very large pool of resources, including capital, talent, consumer data, and most importantly, the consumer's attention and usage. Considering that these companies are also bound to fully answer any data requests posted by their respective government agencies is a somewhat chilling thought.
Talking about government agencies, some recommendations regarding collection use of data by IoT providers have been outlined by the US Federal Trade Commission, or FTC. They include encryption of data at all steps, secure collection, storage, and processing, demanding user content, and granularization regarding what the data the user wants to share with IoT companies. So in every step, the user needs to grant their acceptance of that. But as we've seen with smartphone apps, that's a more or less subconscious process, and there is no real choice there, because if you want to use the service, you need to consent. So a real freedom of choice instead of all or nothing is something that we would need. So you could say, I want to have this, but not that. And only collecting data that is needed to provide the service, as well as only storing that data for a limited amount of time. So a lot of new regulations which were not previously considered in smartphone applications. While lawmakers are slowly passing such principles into the law of code, or into the code of law rather, they also rely on development relating to governments of connected cars, which share similar demand for regulation. And you can see that with connected cars, things happen quite fast. So this could serve as a precedence for other IoT use cases.
When it comes to security, IoT systems share the same issues that conventional servers and smartphones do. And these include authentication breaches, unencrypted communication, code injection, poor handling of security updates, and even the good old DDoS attacks, which would, as you mentioned before, flood the system with requests from several entities. If the goal is to have a vast amount of low-price, low-power sensors and IoT devices, this might come at the cost of firewalls and firmware to protect them from attacks. Distributed systems like IoT remain more vulnerable to attacks than centralized systems, as a system potentially is only as strong as its weakest link. This is especially true for devices with internet connections, as is the case for many IoT devices, as they can be exploited remotely. Additionally, the increased complexity of IoT systems with many interacting devices poses an architectural challenge towards thinking and creating a secure system. But it's also very hard to identify what exactly causes a security breach after an attack happens. Security is especially of a concern when we consider that IoT systems might take over important and very vulnerable functions in day-to-day life, such as the control of connected cars or smart homes. So this is an important issue that must be addressed properly.
While on the one hand, we don't like big tech companies to always take the biggest market share and essentially control the whole market by themselves, they are quite suited to provide interoperability and common standards, because early IoT systems have been somewhat of a hack, which is also due to their nature, because you need components and you need experts and talent from hardware side, from the network side, and from the connectivity side. So the interoperability of IoT devices and their data demands really asks for globally accepted and used open source protocols and standards for IoT infrastructure, device and gateway communication, as well as data and applications. Yet partially they are in development or to be developed. As of now, IoT suffers thus from platform fragmentation, lack of interoperability, and lack of common technical standards. Standardization, especially of hardware ecosystems and technical standards, is crucial to enable innovation, as it creates incentives for innovators and software developers to plan ahead and commit resources to build atop these structures so they know what they're dealing with. We have seen the lack of these standards, for instance, in relation to connectivity, where separate ecosystems exist for all mentioned technologies, such as 5G, LoRaWAN, Bluetooth, or even Wi-Fi.
While IoT can itself be a major sustainability enabler, as we saw with the smart bridges, smart buildings, smart homes, creating more energy efficient systems, ironically, would mean that we would have to find a way to sustainably produce, power, and recycle these products. Now, as the numbers increase, this could increase the demand for this will increase the demand for semiconductors and could add to the blockbuster scale energy consumption and CO2 emissions and could cause a lot of waste. Remember that modern electronics still rely on heavy metals as well as rare earth metals, and they also need highly toxic synthetic chemicals. This means that it makes it very hard to properly recycle them. The mining of rare metals today is itself a very questionable practice when it comes to environmental considerations and worker safety. But hopefully, with space colonization and asteroid mining, we can gain access to these rare metals and chemicals more easily and more environmentally friendly.
As societies as a whole, we have not really figured out the business side of IoT. Consider this. Around 75% of IoT implementations remain in the pilot stage, serving for little more than feature hunting or testing out new technologies. On the other hand, exploration is needed and normal in the early stages of a technology before it achieves dominant designs and standardization. As we've mentioned already, you need a really interdisciplinary team to set up an IoT project. You need at least someone that understands software, someone that understands hardware and sensors, and someone that understands connectivity, and ideally also someone that understands business. So a common theme of both IoT implementations and corporations in the space is that they lack the entrepreneurial creativity, business sense, and consumer focus that successful innovations and tech companies ultimately require.
Now that we've wrapped our challenges and thus also our look at where IoT stands today, it's time to lift our head up and look into the future with our utopian day in the life, which begins very ideally at an optimal time. The smart home, or in this case, my smart bedroom, knows because it has run simulations and has compared previous data of the last years to understand on which days with what kind of weather, how I wake up. So it plays my favorite song. It slowly uses projectors in the windows to simulate a natural sunlight to naturally wake me up. And it makes sure that it doesn't go too fast by measuring pulse, heart rate, and blood pressure. And the computer, all in all, detects what is ideal for me, what is my ideal breakfast, and it wakes me up, tells me what time it is to take my medication. And even if I had something to dictate, I enjoy the convenience using simple voice commands to change the tune to what I feel like.
After a couple minutes, I get bored of my really comfy smart home and I decide to take a walk inside my smart city, which is called Utopia. And I have really a lot of time because a lot of work is just completely voluntary. I can do what I love and like to do. Most major tasks in our society have been automated. I look around and see proof for this: mobility, logistics, manufacturing, production, as well as public services, cleaning, garbage collection. All of this is automated using sensors, connectivity, and software. I activate the digital Earth function in my VR device, which connects geospatial information of myself and the things around me with knowledge and data about those things from the internet. And I learn about different biological processes and the history of the town, Utopia, while walking through it.
Now, during lunch, of course, my system has recommended to me what would appeal most to my taste buds. And of course, it's a 3D printed meal, meaning that it contains all the vitamins, nutrients, and minerals that I need for a healthy lunch. And I take some time to look at what my various businesses are doing. And some of these consist of providing the unused energy from my home to the smart grid, for which I get paid when for sharing usage data, for instance, when testing new connectivity apps like the smart music player, which I tested this morning during my walk.
In the afternoon, I order an autonomous taxi and hop in after opening the door with my voice to drive to a nearby restaurant to see a friend. Yes, there still are restaurants. I connect my VR glasses to the car's entertainment system and enjoy a movie while the car takes a little detour in order to automatically refill its tank. I arrive statically 2.8 seconds later than expected, but no problem. My friend is already there, and as I opted in to automatically share my dietary plans with my friends when I meet them, we decide to go for the salty herbs popcorn as suggested by my VR device instead of the cocoa butter caramel one.
Speaking of VR devices, they are now much smaller, they're almost invisible, and they're actually cool. They're not big, bulky devices. I actually don't even own one of those prehistoric, what do you call it, smartphones anymore. Most of my day to day actions are solved using voice commands. And increasingly, with this new BCI, I've been actually able to communicate with my computer purely through thoughts, meaning that I can uh, now connect or communicate with my thoughts directly to my entire to my home, to all the devices in my home. It's a real utopia.
I come home in the evening and my most important and probably also most useful smart home device, my smart fridge, has decided to dispose of rotten groceries, asking for my permission to update the food order algorithm to contain less of them in my next automatic food order and thus reduce waste. I decide to cook myself today just because it's fun, but not unaided. So I still use the help of technology. My smart cooking apparel indicates the optimal conditions for my meal to be ready, so nothing is under or overcooked.
And those rotten groceries that you mentioned before, they were actually transported to the local composting area, which was then sold to farmers so that they could use it to grow food, meaning that even when you wasted food, you didn't waste it, you merely didn't consume it, but you were still able to make some money. Now that it's nighttime, I decide to organize a home party, and my AI has automatically checked my friend's calendar, their public mood states, if they chose to share this data, and has sent out optimized invitation to their devices, worded, of course, in such a way that they would optimally come. And they also asked them to opt in for my party playlist if they wanted to. My smart fridge automatically estimated and ordered the party food and alcohol based on not only my preferences but also guest preferences. And with one voice command, my previously saved party settings from my home comes back in an instant. Marine blue light setting, cool down temperatures, correct decibel levels for my music, and the right cyber physical appearance for my butler robots. All in all, it's a pretty great day. And after my party, I go back to sleep. My smart home system cools the temperature in the bedroom. It adjusts temperature and humidity to the optimum. It makes sure that I can have undisturbed deep sleep and REM and light sleep. And I wake up on the next day ready to charge at it with all my utopian technology.
Awesome. This wraps up our Utopian Day with IoT.
And I think next week's topic, I don't even remember, but I'm sure it'll be very interesting. Uh, 5G and IoT is something that I think to date has been one of the few technologies where we've actually seen a lot of progress in the last 1 to 2 years, just because it's a very current topic. But as you mentioned, there's still a very long way to go before we can have this sort of utopian future. and there are many challenges to be solved, but we are very sure that all those challenges are worth solving because the upsides of living in such a utopian smart city is nearly endless. And with that,
Absolutely.
we would like to thank you. If you would like to check out our article, head out to our Medium blog on techniax.medium.com. You can also check us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all other major podcast platforms. You can even head to our own very own landing page, utechniax.com. And as always, stay utopian.
Your Techniax.